Rain tapped gently on the windows of Marlowe's diner as a tired wind blew through the empty streets of a small, forgotten corner of the city, where dreams often slipped through the cracks and people like Grace Thompson clung to hope with trembling fingers. The fluorescent buzz of the kitchen lights hummed overhead, blending with the soft clink of dishes being stacked away and the distant sound of a car passing by outside, its tires hissing on wet pavement, and inside, Grace, just 23 years old but feeling at least twice that, leaned on the counter, rubbing her aching lower back with one hand while staring at the faded calendar on the wall, a circled date staring back at her like an unspoken dare, rent due tomorrow, again, with only $13 and some change between her and an eviction notice that might finally break her. She was a waitress, not by choice but by necessity, the only job she could land after dropping out of nursing school when her mother got sick and her part-time jobs weren't enough to cover tuition and the stack of hospital bills that arrived like clockwork after every round of treatment, and now, after losing her mom, she was alone in a one-bedroom apartment with flickering lights, a fridge that moaned when it turned on, and a heart that had grown weary from too many goodbyes and not enough beginnings. Grace was the kind of person who smiled even when she was tired, who gave extra fries when no one was looking, who remembered birthdays and always said, please, and, thank you, even when others didn't, and as she wiped down the last table of the night, a sudden gust of wind pushed the diner door open, setting the bell above it jingling sharply and drawing her attention to the doorway where a tall, thin man stood, drenched from head to toe, his coat hanging off him like a wet blanket and eyes sunken deep from cold, hunger, and something else, something like sorrow, but older, heavier. He looked hesitant, the way someone does when they've heard no so many times that they've forgotten how to expect anything else, and when he finally stepped inside, water dripping onto the floor behind him, he raised a hand in apology and said, I'm sorry, I haven't eaten in 2 days, and I thought maybe you had something left over, anything at all, his voice cracking like brittle paper, and in that instant, Grace's heart broke a little more, because she saw in him what she often felt herself, the weight of being invisible in a world moving too fast to care. Without a second thought, she nodded, motioning for him to sit, and headed into the kitchen where the cook had long gone home, but there were scraps of chicken stew still warm on the stove, a piece of cornbread wrapped in foil, and she plated it all with care, pouring a glass of water and adding 2 sugar packets beside it, not because he asked, but because she remembered how her mom liked her tea sweet, even when they had nothing else. Then carried the meal to him, set it down, and simply said, it's on me, before walking away, leaving him to eat in peace, unaware that this tiny act of kindness, this moment of humanity given freely in a world too often cold, would start a chain of events that would change not just her life, but others in ways neither could have imagined. The man ate slowly at first, as if unsure the food was real, then faster, hungrily, but with quiet gratitude in every bite, and when he was finished, he looked up at her with tears in his eyes and whispered, thank you, and Grace only smiled, too tired to cry, too kind to let him feel ashamed. When he left, she gave him her last $13 in an envelope, slipped into his hand like a secret, and said, find a warm place tonight, and though he tried to protest, she insisted, and he left with that envelope, looking back once to offer a nod of thanks before disappearing into the rain. That night, Grace walked home alone, stomach empty, shoes soaked, but soul strangely full, because sometimes, giving what little you have is the only thing that makes the world feel right again, and she didn't expect anything from it, not a thank you, not a miracle, just the small, silent satisfaction of having done something good in a world that often forgot what goodness looked like. But fate, it seemed, had other plans, because the next morning, as she clocked into another long shift with tired feet and a grumbling stomach, the diner buzzed with unusual activity, and there, sitting in a corner booth with a fresh cup of coffee and a leather briefcase was a man in a navy blue suit with salt and pepper hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that softened the moment they met hers. Are you Grace Thompson? He asked, rising to his feet, and when she nodded, surprised, he extended a hand and said, my name's Charles Whitaker. You met my brother last night, and in that moment, time seemed to slow as he explained how his younger brother Daniel had been missing for over 5 years, lost to addiction and despair after a series of personal tragedies, how the family had searched everywhere, posted flyers, prayed, and finally grieved when no leads turned up, assuming the worst, until last night, when Daniel showed up at a shelter, soaking wet and weeping, clutching an envelope with $13 and a heart full of something no one had seen in years, hope. Charles said it was Grace's kindness that broke through where therapy, money, and even love had failed, that her simple gesture of feeding a stranger and believing he was worth something had reminded Daniel he was still human, still capable of starting over, and that Daniel had asked to see her again, but was in recovery and couldn't yet face the world, and so Charles had come instead, to say thank you the only way he knew how. He handed her a check for $10,000, enough to cover her rent for the year, pay off her mother's medical debts, and restart her nursing education, and when she tried to refuse, stammering through protests and tears, Charles held her hand gently and said, "This isn't charity, Grace. This is what gratitude looks like," and left her standing in the middle of the diner, overwhelmed, stunned, heart pounding and vision blurred by the realization that one small act of kindness had rippled so far beyond what she could see. In the days that followed, everything changed. She caught up on bills, fixed the fridge, bought a warm coat for the first time in years, and even took a cab instead of walking through the cold. Each small luxury a reminder of how far she'd come, and yet, it was never about the money. It was about the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as dark as she feared, that light could still be found in unexpected places, and that people, despite everything, were still capable of incredible compassion. She reapplied to nursing school and this time got in with a full scholarship, thanks to a letter of recommendation from Charles, who also offered to mentor her professionally, and 2 years later, Grace graduated with honors, her cap decorated with the words, "because of kindness," and took a job at a local hospital where she poured herself into every patient with the same compassion she'd once shown a hungry man on a rainy night. Daniel, for his part, stayed clean, completed rehab, and became a counselor at the same shelter that helped him get back on his feet, often sharing his story with others who had lost their way, always ending with, "It started with a bowl of soup and a girl who believed I was worth saving," and one chilly autumn afternoon, Grace visited that shelter, not as a nurse, not as a waitress, but as a guest speaker, invited to share her story at a community event about second chances and the power of kindness, and as she stood at the podium, heart beating fast, she looked out at a room full of strangers, some with tears in their eyes, others holding on to the edges of hope, and began to speak, not with grand words or rehearsed lines, but with the honesty of someone who had been broken and built herself back with love, one act at a time. She told them about her mother, about dropping out of school, about giving her last $13 to a man she didn't know, and how that moment, so small and simple, had changed everything, and as she finished, she said, "Kindness is never wasted. It doesn't always come back the way you expect, but it always matters," and when the crowd stood to applaud, she saw Daniel in the back, clapping with a proud smile, eyes glistening, and she smiled back, not as a hero, but as someone who finally understood the beautiful truth of what it meant to be human, fragile, flawed, and yet still capable of changing the world, one meal, one word, one act of love at a time. And in the years that followed, Grace kept that envelope, the one with the faded $13 receipt, tucked inside her nursing badge, a quiet reminder of the night she gave all she had and received everything in return. Not in money, but in meaning, in connection, in the unshakable belief that even the smallest light can shatter the deepest dark, and that sometimes, all it takes to start a miracle is to see someone, really see them, and offer what you have, even if it's only enough for one warm meal and a little hope.